The forest was quiet, save for the rustle of leaves and the occasional chirp of birds. It wasn't a place anyone would expect to find anything out of the ordinary, just trees, dirt, and shadows stretching long under the afternoon sun. But deep within this seemingly ordinary woodland, something extraordinary had just occurred. A young man named Leo sat cross-legged on the ground, his eyes fixed intently on a crude contraption made of rope, sticks, and clever engineering. He called it the snare, though he'd never expected it to actually work. For weeks now, he'd been setting traps in hopes of catching small game, rabbits, maybe even a deer if luck favored him. Food was scarce these days, and survival meant being resourceful. But what stumbled into his trap that day wasn't an animal at all. It happened so suddenly that Leo almost didn't believe his own eyes. A flash of light, a shimmering blur, as if the air itself had bent around her. And then there she was, suspended awkwardly by one ankle, dangling upside down from the snare like some kind of bizarre fruit. She wasn't human. Her skin glowed faintly blue, not pale but radiant, as though lit from within. Her hair cascaded down toward the ground in silvery waves, each strand shimmering like liquid moonlight. Her ears were pointed slightly, and her large, almond-shaped eyes blinked rapidly, wide with panic. She wore clothing unlike anything Leo had ever seen, fabric that seemed woven from starlight, shifting colors with every movement. For a moment, neither of them moved. The alien girl stared at him with an expression caught between terror and confusion, while Leo simply gaped, frozen in disbelief. He started, scratching the back of his head nervously. You're, not exactly what I was expecting. She flinched at the sound of his voice, twisting violently in the ropes. Her glowing hands clawed desperately at the bindings around her ankle, but they only tightened further. Tears welled up in her luminous eyes as she muttered frantic words in a language Leo couldn't understand. Though incomprehensible, the tone was unmistakable: fear. Leo stood slowly, raising both hands in what he hoped looked like a gesture of peace. Hey! Calm down! I'm not gonna hurt you! If anything, his words seemed to make things worse. She let out a sharp cry, thrashing harder against the restraints. Her body emitted a soft hum, almost musical, but tinged with desperation. Leo realized she must think he intended to harm her, or worse. He took a cautious step closer, then stopped when she recoiled violently. Look, he said softly, keeping his voice steady despite the surreal situation. I don't know who or what you are, okay? But you're caught in my trap, and I can help you get free. Just stop moving before you hurt yourself. Her struggles slowed slightly, though her chest still rose and fell with rapid breaths. Those otherworldly eyes locked onto his face, searching for any sign of deception. Whatever she saw there seemed to calm her marginally, though she remained tense and wary. Leo knelt beside her, careful to keep his movements slow and deliberate. He reached for the knife strapped to his belt, flinching inwardly when she gasped sharply. Relax, he murmured, slicing through the rope with practiced ease. This is just to cut you loose. As soon as the rope snapped, she dropped unceremoniously to the ground. For a brief second, she lay there, dazed, before scrambling backward on her hands and feet until her back hit a tree trunk. Her gaze darted wildly between Leo and the remnants of the snare, as if trying to piece together how such a primitive device could have ensnared her. Leo straightened, brushing dirt off his hands. So, yeah? That was unexpected. He gestured vaguely at her. You're, not from around here, are you? She tilted her head slightly, studying him with renewed curiosity. Slowly, tentatively, she opened her mouth to speak again. This time, instead of the strange, melodic tongue from earlier, her words came haltingly in broken English. You trap me. Why? Her voice was soft, lilting, and carried an accent unlike any Leo had ever heard. Despite the absurdity of the situation, he couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. I didn't mean to, he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck sheepishly. Like I said, I thought I'd catch a rabbit or something. Not someone like you. She frowned, clearly struggling to process his explanation. After a moment, she asked, Why catch? For food, Leo replied bluntly. At her horrified expression, he quickly added, But I definitely wasn't planning on eating you. Trust me. Her frown deepened, suspicion lingering in her glowing eyes. Then, why? Leo hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Finally, he settled on the truth, or part of it. Because I need to survive. Same reason you probably ended up here, right? Looking for resources or whatever. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to argue, but no sound came out. Instead, she glanced at the forest surrounding them, her posture stiffening. It was clear she felt exposed, vulnerable. Leo sighed, running a hand through his messy brown hair. Look, I know this whole thing is messed up. But we're stuck with each other for now. You're hurt, scared, and probably lost. And honestly? He gave her a wry smile. You're way too interesting to let go just yet. Her eyebrows furrowed, but there was a flicker of intrigue in her gaze, a hint that maybe, just maybe, she trusted him a little bit more than she let on. And so began their unlikely encounter, a human and an alien, bound together by circumstance, fear, and perhaps something neither of them fully understood yet. The alien girl, Leo decided to call her Luma, for lack of a better name, given her radiant appearance, remained cautious but less combative after their initial meeting. She followed him hesitantly as he led her deeper into the forest, away from the clearing where she'd been caught. Her movements were graceful yet deliberate, like a predator unsure whether it was being lured into another trap. Leo glanced over his shoulder frequently, partly to ensure she was still behind him and partly to study her more closely. Up close, Luma's features were even stranger than they'd appeared at first glance. Her skin shimmered faintly in the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees, and her eyes seemed to shift colors depending on the angle, sometimes silver, sometimes gold, and occasionally a deep violet that made Leo's breath catch. Where are we going? Luma asked abruptly, breaking the silence. Her voice had grown steadier, though her accent remained heavy. To my camp, Leo replied without looking back. It's not far. Safer there. She frowned, her delicate brows knitting together. Safe, why? He shrugged. You don't want to be out here alone, trust me. There are worse things than traps waiting for you. Her gaze flickered nervously to the shadows between the trees, as if imagining unseen dangers lurking just beyond sight. For a moment, she looked younger, almost childlike in her vulnerability. But then her expression hardened again, and she straightened her posture, clearly determined not to show weakness. They walked for another 10 minutes before reaching Leo's makeshift campsite. It wasn't much, a small lean-to constructed from branches and leaves, a fire pit blackened with soot, and a pile of supplies stacked neatly against a tree trunk, but it was home to him. He gestured for Luma to sit near the fire while he rummaged through his pack for food. You hungry? He asked, pulling out a tin can filled with dried berries and nuts. Luma eyed the offering warily. What is this? Food, Leo said simply, handing her the can. Not exactly gourmet, but it'll keep you alive. She took it reluctantly, sniffing cautiously before taking a tiny bite. Her reaction was immediate and unexpected. Her eyes widened in delight, and a soft hum escaped her lips. It sounded almost musical, like the gentle strumming of strings. This tastes good, she murmured, genuinely surprised. She ate slowly, savoring each mouthful, while Leo watched with amusement. You act like you've never had berries before, he teased. I haven't, she admitted, pausing mid-bite. My people, we do not eat like this. Oh? Leo raised an eyebrow. How do you eat? She hesitated, as if debating how much to reveal. Finally she said, Energy. We absorb energy directly. Food, it is unfamiliar. Well, welcome to Earth, Leo said dryly. Here, we eat to survive. And speaking of surviving, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Why are you here? I mean, no offense, but aliens don't usually wander into random forests uninvited. Luma stiffened, her glowing hands curling protectively around the tin can. I am lost, she admitted quietly. My ship malfunctioned during transit. I crash-landed nearby. A spaceship? Leo whistled low under his breath. That explains a lot. So what, you're stranded? She nodded, her luminous eyes clouding with sadness. Yes. My communication device was damaged in the crash. Without it, I cannot contact my people. Leo rubbed his chin thoughtfully. So you're stuck here until someone finds you, or until you fix your gear? Correct. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. Well, crap. That's gonna make things complicated. For both of us, Luma added pointedly. Leo chuckled despite himself. Yeah, I guess so. Look, I'm not exactly rolling in resources either, but I'll help however I can. For now, though, you need rest. You look like you've been through hell. She didn't argue, which told him just how exhausted she must have been. He gestured toward the lean-to. You can sleep there. It's not fancy, but it keeps the rain off. Luma hesitated, glancing at the crude shelter uncertainly. Then, with a resigned sigh, she crawled inside and curled up on the makeshift bed of leaves and blankets. Within moments, her breathing slowed, and she drifted into a restless sleep. As night fell, Leo sat by the fire, staring into the flames. His mind raced with questions and possibilities. An alien. Right here, in his forest. It was insane, impossible, and yet utterly real. What did it mean? Was she dangerous? Could she be trusted? And then there was the bigger question: why had she come to Earth in the first place? Before he could dwell too deeply on those thoughts, a sudden noise snapped him out of his reverie. A twig snapped somewhere in the darkness, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching through the underbrush. Leo's heart skipped a beat. He grabbed the knife from his belt and rose silently to his feet, peering into the shadows. Whatever, or whoever, it was getting closer. A figure emerged from the trees, silhouetted against the moonlight. At first, Leo thought it might be another animal, but then he realized it was human. Or at least, it looked human. Who's there? He called out sharply, gripping the knife tightly. The figure stepped into the light of the fire, revealing a man dressed in tattered clothing, his face gaunt and hollow-eyed. He held a rifle slung over one shoulder, and his expression was grim. Just passing through, the stranger growled. Didn't think anyone else lived out here. No one does, Leo replied evenly. What do you want? The man's gaze shifted past Leo, landing on the lean-to where Luma slept. His eyes narrowed suspiciously. Got company? Leo tensed, instinctively stepping in front of the shelter. None of your business. The man smirked, raising his hands in mock surrender. Relax, kid. I'm not looking for trouble. Just figured I'd scavenge whatever I could find. His eyes lingered on the supplies stacked against the tree. Looks like you've got plenty to spare. I've got enough, Leo shot back. Now leave. The man hesitated, clearly weighing his options. Then, with a shrug, he turned and disappeared back into the forest, leaving Leo shaken but relieved. When the footsteps faded entirely, Leo let out a shaky breath and knelt beside the lean-to. Peering inside, he saw that Luma was still asleep, blissfully unaware of the danger that had passed. For now they were safe. But Leo knew better than to assume it would last. Whoever that man was, and whatever he wanted, he wouldn't stay away forever. And neither would the secrets surrounding Luma. Morning came too quickly for Leo's liking. He woke with a start, his body stiff from sleeping upright against a tree trunk. The fire had burned low during the night, leaving only faint embers glowing in the pit. Around him, the forest was alive with the sounds of birds chirping and leaves rustling in the breeze. Luma stirred in the lean-to, her luminous eyes fluttering open as she emerged from sleep. She blinked blearily at Leo before sitting up, brushing strands of silvery hair out of her face. Despite the circumstances, there was something almost serene about her presence, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. You slept well? Leo asked, trying to sound casual despite the tension lingering from last night's encounter. She nodded slowly, though her expression betrayed a hint of unease. I did. Thank you. He forced a smile. Good. We'll need all the energy we can get. Her brow furrowed. Why? Leo hesitated, unsure how much to tell her. Finally, he decided honesty was the best approach. We had a visitor last night. A human, one who looked like he meant trouble. Luma's eyes widened, and she glanced instinctively toward the edge of the campsite, as if expecting the stranger to reappear. What did he want? Not sure, Leo admitted. But he saw you, or at least your hiding spot. I don't think he knows what you are, but it's only a matter of time before curiosity gets the better of him. She swallowed visibly, her hands trembling slightly. Then, we should leave. It's not that simple, Leo said grimly. This forest is dangerous enough without wandering blindly into unknown territory. Besides, you're still recovering, and I doubt you're ready for a long trek. Luma frowned, clearly unhappy with the situation but unwilling to argue. Instead, she asked, What do we do then? For now? Stay alert, Leo replied. If he comes back, and I'm betting he will, we'll deal with him. Until then, he gestured toward the supplies stacked nearby. Help me sort through this stuff. If we're going to survive together, we'll need to figure out how to make it work. Over the next few hours, an uneasy routine settled over the camp. Luma proved surprisingly helpful, using her sharp mind and keen senses to assist Leo in ways he hadn't anticipated. When they ran out of water, she pointed out a hidden spring nestled among the rocks, its crystal-clear stream flowing steadily even in the dry season. When Leo struggled to repair a torn section of the lean-to, she used her glowing fingers to mend the fabric with surprising precision, weaving the fibers back together like threads of light. Despite their progress, however, the tension between them remained palpable. Luma rarely spoke unless spoken to, and when she did, her words were measured and cautious. It was clear she didn't fully trust him, not yet anyway. And truthfully, Leo couldn't blame her. Stranded on an alien planet with nothing but a strange human for company? He'd be wary too. Still, there were moments when the barriers seemed to soften. Once, while gathering firewood, Luma paused to examine a cluster of wildflowers growing along the edge of the clearing. She knelt beside them, her fingertips brushing gently against their delicate petals, and murmured something under her breath, a phrase in her native tongue that sounded both wistful and beautiful. What does that mean? Leo asked, curious despite himself. She glanced up, startled, before offering a small, hesitant smile. It means light in darkness. These flowers remind me of home. Leo nodded silently, struck by the quiet longing in her voice. For the first time, he realized just how far away from everything familiar she truly was. No wonder she seemed so guarded. By midday, the weather turned sour. Dark clouds rolled in overhead, blotting out the sun and casting the forest in shadow. The air grew heavy with moisture, and the distant rumble of thunder signaled an approaching storm. We should fortify the shelter, Leo said, eyeing the sky nervously. If this turns into a downpour, we'll regret not preparing. Together, they worked quickly to reinforce the lean-to, adding extra layers of branches and leaves to keep the rain out. As they labored, Leo noticed Luma glancing repeatedly toward the tree line, her posture tense and alert. What's wrong? He asked finally. I feel watched, she admitted quietly. Like someone, or something, is out there. Leo frowned, scanning the forest around them. At first glance, everything seemed normal. Birds flitted between branches, squirrels darted across fallen logs, and the wind whispered through the trees. But upon closer inspection, he realized she was right. The usual hum of life felt muted, almost unnatural. You're probably just jumpy after last night, he said, though his tone lacked conviction. Let's finish up here and stay close to camp. The storm hit shortly after they completed the repairs. Rain poured down in sheets, turning the ground into mud and filling the air with the smell of damp earth. They huddled inside the lean-to, listening to the relentless patter of raindrops on the makeshift roof. This planet is unpredictable, Luma remarked, wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to ward off the chill. That's one way to put it, Leo agreed wryly. But storms pass. You'll see. She gave him a sidelong glance, her lips curving into the faintest hint of a smile. You seem very adaptable. He shrugged. When life throws crap at you, you either adapt or drown. Simple as that. Before she could respond, a loud crack echoed through the forest, followed by the unmistakable sound of splintering wood. Both of them froze, staring wide-eyed at the entrance of the lean-to. What was that? Luma whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. Leo grabbed his knife and crept cautiously outside, squinting through the rain. At first, he saw nothing unusual, just trees swaying violently in the wind. But then he spotted it, a massive oak tree near the edge of the clearing, its trunk split cleanly in half by a bolt of lightning. The top half lay smoldering on the ground, smoke curling lazily into the air. As he stared at the wreckage, a flicker of movement caught his eye. Someone, or something, was crouched behind the fallen tree, partially obscured by the veil of rain. Stay here, Leo hissed over his shoulder to Luma before stepping forward, his grip tightening on the knife. Who's there? The figure rose slowly, revealing the same gaunt man from the previous night. His rifle was slung across his chest, and his face was twisted into a predatory grin. Well, he drawled, taking a step closer. Looks like I found exactly what I was looking for. Leo's stomach sank. Whatever this man wanted, it wasn't good news for either of them. The rain continued to pour, soaking everything in sight and turning the ground beneath their feet into a slippery mess. Leo stood his ground, knife in hand, as the stranger advanced with deliberate steps. The man's grin was unsettling, a mix of malice and amusement that sent a chill down Leo's spine. Who are you? Leo demanded, keeping his voice steady despite the knot tightening in his chest. What do you want? The man chuckled, low and menacing. Name's Drake. And I think you already know what I want. His gaze flicked past Leo, landing on the lean-to where Luma remained hidden. That thing you've got stashed away, it doesn't belong here. Hand it over, and maybe I'll let you live. Leo's jaw clenched. She's not a thing. She's just someone who needs help. Drake snorted. Yeah, right. You expect me to believe that glowing freak is just some lost traveler? Come on, kid. Don't insult my intelligence. Leo's grip tightened on the knife. Whatever you're thinking, you're wrong. She hasn't done anything to you. Doesn't matter. Drake shot back, his tone hardening. People like her, they don't belong here. They bring trouble. Chaos. Or worse. He took another step forward, raising the rifle slightly. Now move aside, or I'll make you regret it. Behind him, Luma stirred uneasily within the shelter. Leo could hear her breathing quicken, though she stayed silent, clearly trying to remain unnoticed. He couldn't blame her, this wasn't her fight. But he also knew he couldn't let Drake get anywhere near her. I'm not moving, Leo said firmly. You want her? You'll have to go through me. Drake's grin widened, revealing crooked teeth. Brave words for a skinny kid with a butter knife. He raised the rifle fully, aiming it squarely at Leo's chest. Last chance, boy. Step aside. Time seemed to slow as Leo weighed his options. He could try to disarm Drake, but the distance between them made that nearly impossible. He could shout for Luma to run, but without knowing the forest, she'd be easy prey. Or he could bluff, and hope Drake underestimated him. Summoning every ounce of courage, Leo smirked. You really think your gun scares me? Go ahead, pull the trigger. See how far that gets you. For a moment, Drake hesitated, his finger hovering over the trigger. Then, with a growl, he lowered the rifle slightly. Fine. Play hero all you want. But when she screws you over, don't say I didn't warn you. Before Leo could respond, a sudden flash of light erupted from behind him. Luma had stepped out of the lean-to, her entire body glowing brighter than ever before. Her hands were raised defensively, and her eyes blazed with an otherworldly intensity. Leave us alone, she commanded, her voice echoing unnaturally loud over the storm. It wasn't a plea, it was a warning. Drake staggered back, momentarily stunned by the sight of her. What the hell? Luma didn't give him time to recover. With a swift motion, she extended one glowing hand, and a pulse of energy shot outward, striking Drake squarely in the chest. He cried out as the force knocked him off his feet, sending him sprawling into the mud several yards away. Leo gaped at her, torn between awe and disbelief. Did you just zap him? It is how my people defend themselves, Luma explained tersely, her expression grim. I did not wish to harm him, but we cannot risk exposure. Drake groaned weakly from where he lay, clutching his side. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead, mingling with the rainwater pooling around him. For a moment, Leo considered finishing the confrontation, perhaps confiscating the rifle or tying him up, but Luma shook her head sharply. No, she said firmly. We must leave now. He will recover, and others may come. Reluctantly, Leo nodded. She was right, they couldn't afford to linger. Together, they gathered what supplies they could carry and set off into the forest, leaving Drake unconscious in the rain. As they trudged through the storm, Leo found himself stealing glances at Luma. She moved with purpose now, her earlier hesitation replaced by determination. Whatever fears she'd felt before had been tempered by resolve, and perhaps a newfound trust in their partnership. You didn't tell me you could do that, Leo said finally, breaking the silence. Luma glanced at him sidelong. Would it have changed your opinion of me? He frowned. Of course not. But still, it would have been nice to know. I did not think it mattered, she admitted quietly. Until now, I believed hiding was safer. Revealing my abilities only invites danger. And yet here we are, Leo muttered dryly. Running from danger anyway. A small, humorless smile tugged at her lips. Yes. Here we are. They walked in silence for a while longer, the storm gradually easing into a light drizzle. Eventually, they reached a rocky outcrop overlooking a narrow valley. From this vantage point, they could see for miles, an advantage if anyone decided to follow them. We should rest here, Leo suggested, dropping his pack onto the wet ground. Figure out our next move? Luma nodded, crouching beside him. Do you think he will pursue us? Drake? Leo shrugged. Hard to say. Guys like him usually don't take kindly to being bested. But even if he does come after us, we've got two things he doesn't, knowledge of the terrain and, well, you. Her luminous eyes met his, searching for something, reassurance, maybe, or understanding. After a moment, she nodded again. Then we prepare. For whatever comes next. Hours passed as they fortified their position, using rocks and fallen branches to create a makeshift barrier against potential attackers. By the time night fell, the storm had cleared entirely, leaving the sky awash with stars. Leo sat cross-legged near the edge of the outcrop, staring up at the constellations. They're beautiful, Luma murmured, joining him unexpectedly. So different from the skies of my world. Leo glanced at her, surprised by the wistfulness in her voice. You miss it, huh? She nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. Every day. My people, they are peaceful. We value harmony above all else. To be separated from them. She trailed off, swallowing hard. I get it, Leo said softly. Loss isn't easy. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of their shared loneliness hung heavy in the air, binding them together in ways neither had anticipated. Finally, Luma turned to him, her expression softening. Thank you, Leo. For helping me. Even when it puts you in danger. He managed a lopsided smile. Hey, someone's gotta look out for you, right? Her lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, one that reached her glowing eyes for the first time since they'd met. Perhaps, she said quietly. But remember, I can handle myself. Leo chuckled. Noted. As they sat there under the starlit sky, an unspoken bond formed between them, a fragile alliance forged in the crucible of survival. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. And somewhere deep inside, Leo couldn't help but feel that maybe, just maybe, fate had brought them together for a reason. The night passed without incident, but the calm was deceptive. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the valley below in hues of gold and pink, Leo woke to find Luma already awake and standing at the edge of the outcrop. Her glowing form stood silhouetted against the rising sun, her eyes scanning the landscape with an intensity that made his stomach churn. "What's wrong?" he asked groggily, rubbing sleep from his eyes as he joined her. She didn't answer immediately, her gaze fixed on something far below. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and strained. "There are others." Leo squinted, following her line of sight. At first, he saw nothing unusual, just trees swaying gently in the morning breeze. But then movement caught his eye, figures moving through the forest, their shapes dark and indistinct against the foliage. Too many to be coincidence. "Are those hunters?" he whispered, dread pooling in his gut. Luma shook her head slightly. "Not hunters. Soldiers." The word hit him like a punch to the chest. "Soldiers? Human soldiers?" "No," she replied grimly. "They are not human." Panic surged through Leo, though he fought to keep it hidden. He glanced back at their makeshift camp, assessing their options. They were exposed here, perched on the rocky ledge like sitting ducks. If those soldiers, or whatever they were, discovered them, escape would be nearly impossible. "We need to move," he said urgently, grabbing their packs and shoving supplies inside. "Now." Luma nodded, already gathering her things. "They are tracking me. My energy signature, it must have alerted them when I used my powers against Drake." "So they're after you specifically?" Leo asked, his mind racing. "Why?" Her expression hardened. "My people possess technology humans cannot comprehend. To them, I am a resource, a weapon to exploit or destroy." Leo swore under his breath. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about protecting someone who had become more than just an ally. Someone who trusted him. "Okay," he muttered, shouldering his pack. "We'll stick to higher ground. Stay off their radar for as long as we can." Without another word, they set off, descending cautiously from the outcrop and weaving through the dense forest. Every step felt heavier than the last, each rustle of leaves amplified by paranoia. The soldiers, if that's what they truly were, moved with eerie precision, fanning out across the valley like a net closing in around its prey. Hours later, they reached a shallow cave tucked into the side of a hill. It wasn't much, but it offered cover and a chance to regroup. Leo collapsed onto the cold stone floor, breathing heavily as he wiped sweat from his brow. "This is getting worse," he admitted, his voice trembling slightly. "How many are there?" "Too many," Luma replied quietly, crouching beside him. Her glow had dimmed significantly, as if she were conserving her energy. "And they will not stop until they find me." Leo clenched his fists, frustration boiling over. "Then we fight. Together." She looked at him sharply. "You don't understand. These beings, they are relentless. Ruthless. Even if we manage to evade them now, they will come again. And again. Well, we can't just give up," Leo snapped, his voice rising despite himself. "I won't let them take you." For a moment, Luma stared at him, her luminous eyes filled with something he couldn't quite place. Gratitude, perhaps, or admiration. Then she sighed softly, her shoulders slumping in resignation. "There may be another way," she murmured. "But it is dangerous." "Dangerous how?" Leo pressed. She hesitated before answering. "My ship, the one I crashed, is still intact. If I can reach it, I might be able to repair the communication device and contact my people. Once they know where I am, they can extract me." Leo frowned. "That sounds straightforward enough. What's the catch?" "The crash site is deep within enemy territory," she explained. "It will require navigating through areas heavily patrolled by those soldiers. And even if we succeed," she trailed off, her voice dropping to a whisper, "I do not know if your presence will endanger you further." He waved a hand dismissively. "I've been in tight spots before. We'll figure it out." Despite his bravado, Leo couldn't ignore the gnawing fear in the pit of his stomach. This wasn't some random hunter or scavenger. They were dealing with forces beyond anything he'd ever encountered. Still, backing down wasn't an option, not while Luma needed him. They spent the rest of the day planning their route, using the limited map Leo carried to chart a path toward the crash site. By nightfall, they were ready, or as ready as they could be. As they prepared to leave the relative safety of the cave, Luma stopped Leo with a gentle hand on his arm. "Before we go, there is something I must tell you." Her tone gave him pause. "What is it?" She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "If we fail, if they capture me, you cannot intervene. Promise me this." Leo's blood ran cold. "No. Absolutely not. I'm not leaving you to die. It is not dying I fear," she said softly. "It is what they will do to you if they discover your involvement. You must promise me, Leo. For both our sakes." He wanted to argue, to insist that he wouldn't abandon her no matter the cost. But the look in her eyes stopped him, a mixture of pleading and resolve that left no room for negotiation. Finally, he nodded reluctantly. "Fine. I promise. But only because I trust you to get us out of this alive." A faint smile touched her lips. "Then let us begin." Under the cover of darkness, they slipped silently through the forest, moving like shadows among the trees. The air was thick with tension, every sound magnified tenfold. Twice, they had to duck into hiding as patrols passed nearby, their strange armor glinting faintly in the moonlight. By the time they reached the outskirts of the crash site, exhaustion was setting in, but so was determination. In the distance, Leo could see the wreckage of Luma's ship jutting out of the earth like a broken spear. Its metallic surface shimmered faintly, almost blending with the starlit sky. "That's it," Luma whispered, her voice tinged with relief. "Almost there." But as they approached, a sudden realization struck Leo. The soldiers weren't guarding the area, they were waiting. "They knew we were coming," he breathed, panic creeping into his voice. "It's a trap." Luma's expression darkened. "Yes. But we have no choice. We must try." With no other options, they pressed forward, stepping boldly into the open, and straight into the jaws of danger. Dozens of soldiers emerged from the shadows, surrounding them in a tight circle. Their weapons gleamed menacingly, trained squarely on Luma. One figure stepped forward, a towering alien with crimson skin and eyes that burned like embers. "You cannot escape, Lamera," the creature growled, its voice dripping with malice. "Surrender, and your suffering will end quickly." Luma's hands clenched into fists, her body beginning to glow once more. Beside her, Leo tightened his grip on his knife, knowing full well they were outnumbered and outmatched. "I won't surrender," she said defiantly, her voice ringing with quiet strength. "And neither will he." The soldier smirked cruelly. "Then you leave us no choice." In that moment, Leo braced himself for the worst, but instead of fear, he felt something else. Resolve. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. Because sometimes, even in the darkest moments, hope finds a way to shine through.